All right, so good morning. Welcome to the Ethical Culture Society of Westchester's Sunday platform meeting. My name is Bart Worden. I'm the clergy leader for the Ethical Society and will be your presider today. The Ethical Society is a community of people who aim to make a world where compassion and equity are the driving forces for realizing the unique worth and dignity of each person. We seek a world where fear and anger are met with love and respect, and where our differences enhance rather than diminish our connection with the rich diversity of life. And I can say for me personally, being part of the ethical movement has been a life-forming and life-transmuting experience on the whole. And I just feel so grateful that we've had so many opportunities to gather together to figure out ways to work towards the good. And I'm really happy that you're all here today as well. So every Sunday, we like to take some time for thoughtful reflection and conversation about a meaningful topic. So I'll pose a question for you to consider, and then our host will randomly assign each of us to a virtual breakout room. And this will be in groups of 3. Right? And once you're gathered in the room, take turns responding to the question I'll be posing, and focus especially on listening to each other's sharing in this let's say 5 to 7 minute session. All right, and after that, we'll come back together, and those who would like to share will have an opportunity to share. All right. Please do note the security features don't operate in breakout rooms. If you have any struggles, you can contact the host, or you can leave the breakout room without leaving the whole session, and you can always go back to it as well. So just to know that's within your control. All right, so today's request. Imagine you have been invited to visit several of the 54 countries on the continent of Africa, and you get to choose where you visit first. Where do you imagine you would go? And what about that location appeals to you? All right, so when you see the invitation to enter the breakout room, please accept it. And there'll be a notification when there's 1 minute to go before the room is closed.
I had a good time talking with Shay.
So of our community, you two are people who both have been on the continent of Africa at least once.
Yeah, we're yakking about that. In some cases. Our observations.
Oh, correction. I have not been to the continent.
You haven't been? Oh.
No, I have not. That is.
Going.
I am going because with everything. Unfortunately, things definitely got delayed with COVID because I was supposed to go with Keith. Remember?
Yeah.
So we couldn't go after COVID, and so I've got 2 major projects right now that are supposed to be kicking off once we get a little bit more post-COVID. But getting some information about Guinea, getting some information about Botswana and everything. But yeah, we're busy.
Oh
Still working on those things.
Yeah. Wow.
Hey, Shay, I meant to mention that you really got to study these DNA things because not all of them are what they crack up to be. The inexpensive ones aren't worth the paper they're written on, and you can get really factual good ones, but they're rather expensive.
Look, I just paid $700 for mine, so I'm waiting.
Yeah. I say define expensive.
Like we're talking about $700 for the one I just took. So
wow.
That the one that came back from my mom did not come back as anything substantial. But it's just very interesting how that works as well. I'm just waiting back from the last little bit of information that I had done prior to my father's passing. So that will be I'll hopefully have some more information there.
Wow.
Well, 700 is promising because the ones for under 100, forget it.
I know.
Works for the European set, I'm sure. So this is an opportunity to, if there are folks that want to share a little bit from what happened within their breakout room and their gathering moment.
I'll just add something quick to what you were discussing. I was muted. I was always been very suspicious about this genetic stuff because it doesn't make any sense to me how anybody could follow you back generations based on whatever it is you submit to them, because you've got DNA continuing through generations, and it just doesn't make scientific sense for me for them to figure out that 2,000 years ago you had relatives in England.
Well,
I mean, I'm
maybe
exaggerating, but
this sounds like it might be a great topic for us
okay,
at a
sorry.
future
Yeah.
date to
Okay,
look at
okay.
genetics and the ethics of that whole program, I think, as
Okay.
well.
Yeah.
How about some thoughts about African countries that people might have considered visiting? Go ahead, Maggie. Oh, you muted again.
Maggie.
It popped on and popped off.
There
You're
we
good. Yeah.
go. I met a young man who works in the gas station here in White Plains, and he's from Africa. And he told me, he said, you know, you really need to go and go to Ghana,
Mhm.
where they have that castle of I think what it's called, No Return. And that's where I would like to go, because I would like to see it. I want to see it with my own eyes, and you know, just experience a tour through it. It's just thinking about how those people felt when they knew that they were never going to see their parents or brothers and sisters ever again in life.
Yeah.
So that's where I would like to go.
Wow. Phyllis.
Well, I would like to comment on our group, which was unique. We had a member from India, Srinu, who saw the topic and was interested in it. And of the four of us, he was the only one who had real historical knowledge about different nations in Africa and also their relation to India. So I want to publicly introduce Srinu and thank him for his participation.
Yes, and welcome, Srinu.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know, we commented in our group about you know, the ignorance we have of Africa, and that the predominance of history we've learned growing up is Northern Africa, down into the sub-Saharan, and that the history of other nations is not really been in the ambit. I mean, it's becoming part of world history, but it hasn't been until recent times. And I know of places because of political change in the governance, through news, not through systematic study. And in terms of people I've met, Nigeria is probably the most prominent place that I've encountered people who have recently lived there or their parents live there.
Judy, were you raising your hand?
Yes.
Great.
I was we all shared some of the same feelings that have been expressed, but I was the only one who had been to Africa. And so I, other than where I want to go, which is Ghana, because so many of the aids I've had to hire for dying people in my life have come from Ghana. So I know a bit more about the country than many other people, but having been on the west coast of Africa for several weeks when I visited AIDS hospices with a group of people, obviously, I got to see the incredible poverty that people are living in, and in their homes, not just bypassing those areas, but I was in the homes of people who were taking care of their grandchildren because the family had died. Children aged 12 to 14 who were raising their younger siblings because their parents had died. So I had a very different perspective of Africa, I think, than many people might have encountered or wished for.
Well, Judy, when I hopefully see you, I've been to Ghana in about 2009, I think. And I was there for about, 8 days with friends and her husband, he was on the board of an NGO called Plan USA. So I got to go, and I brought letters from the students in my elementary school to create a pen pal exchange, which we did. But yeah, I think we could talk a lot about Ghana, and I came away with a lot of eye-opening experiences and wonderful feelings about the people there, how friendly everybody was, no matter what their living situation, whether they were living in abject poverty or living in good, strong, sturdy homes, or well-to-do or business people. Everyone was very friendly, and it helped that everyone spoke English, of course. Yeah. And what Maggie was talking about, we took a tour of a castle, which was the exit point for slaves that were being shipped out of their country for the last time. They called it the door of no return. It's a very tiny door, and you could look through it and see the ocean. It's almost a beautiful view, but knowing that people went through that skinny door onto some kind of platform or plank onto a ship and were forcibly removed from their homeland. That's all very moving, very real. And it's too bad we don't learn more in school, as Jeff said, about the history of Africa, of the African countries, because there's a lot to know, and we have a lot in common. A lot. I'm talking about from a personal humanitarian point of view. We are all people, and that's another big thing I came away with, a big wow. So, yeah.
Thank you. All right. Well, let's move into a nice musical interlude.
Can I say something real quick? Lucia, speak to me later about the turtle pie. And Judy,
thank you.
Are you a nurse? Judy, are you a nurse? Is she still there?
Judy Wank is not a nurse. No.
Okay. All right.
Thanks. All right. So Brooklyn is here today, and she's very close by finally, because she's now back in New York.
Yeah.
So welcome.
Brooklyn.
And so glad you're able to join us again this morning.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, we're back from school right now. We're back in Brooklyn, so super happy to be home.
All right, so I'm going to mute everyone, which is going to wind up muting you. So if you just unmute yourself again. Thanks.
Okay, gotcha.
Wow, thank you, Brooklyn. And let me, oops, hold on, make my spotlight go to me. Oh, remove the spotlight from you, add the spotlight to me. It's not letting me spotlight myself. How annoying is that? Anyway, okay.
You are now.
Yeah. Here, I can spotlight myself that way. So again, thank you, Brooklyn. Another beautiful, beautiful bit of music from you today. So much, much appreciated. So our guest today is ethical culture leader, Jay Exodus Hooper. Jay teaches theater history and is a current PhD candidate at Ohio University within the School of Interdisciplinary Arts. Both as a performer and clergy within the ethical culture movement and First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, Jay's ritual-based performance is grounded in the act of homiletics, decolonial humanism, and Black intellectual thought. Their love of orality involves the aesthetic of Black folk talk, one of imagination as meaning-making. Their word-working emphasizes human freedom and interconnectedness through embodiment, intuition, creativity, and improvisation. Their most recent production, Keep Livin', expresses the importance of cultural care and self-care. They've also directed and created a film entitled Humanitas, A Conscious Coloring of Kindness, which is based on the relationship of W.E.B. Du Bois and Felix Adler, and was sponsored and funded by the American Ethical Union's Mosler Fellowship. And that film debuted in New York City a few years ago. Other works include Moving Upon the Face of the Deep, featuring Dr. Cornel West, The Black Sacred Communion, and a collaboration with his life partner, Story Michelle, entitled The Listening Heart. Exemplifying a commitment to equity and inclusion within the arts community at Ohio University, the School of Theater, and Jay are working closely together to decenter the stage and share the spotlight of all those voices that make up our incredible students, staff, and faculty. These kinds of transdisciplinary approaches console and agitate communities in reimagining and reclaiming narratives that honor the inherited worth and dignity within all people, a love work that Jay is committed to. And let me say personally that Jay has brought a real freshness to the ethical movement, and his presence has encouraged me and many others to stretch our sensibilities about a great many things. One small example of that is, we might say, sartorial. When I first met Jay at a ethical education conference, they were just fabulously dressed and in such a intriguing and wild and artsy way. I was clear that this is somebody who is unique and quite different from the folks that I'd known in my life, and that he's proven that again and again. So I'm trying to keep up, and I'm still a little bit lame on this, but at least for today, I've decided to go ahead and mix stripes and plaid. And so anyway, we'll see how well this translates into going a little bit deeper. But Jay has brought much more deeper things to us in this movement. And today, I think, will be a good example of some mind-bending and mind-stretching interactions that will help us kind of grow a bit and certainly experience a greater diversity of life. So Jay's presentation today is the Scramble for Africa. So welcome, Jay.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Bart. It's so good to see all of you. Thank you for welcoming me. If you notice, you'll probably notice I'm looking this direction, and that's because you're on this screen over here. The camera is one way. And I just want to make sure that I'm, kind of just letting you know, so I'm not like avoiding you. I'm actually looking at you. But I just want to say thank you for having me. Today, we are going to probably break a little bit of the platform rules, but I did hear that this is kind of tradition. This goes back to some times where you could actually just talk during platform and interject. So I want a little bit of that little bit of stirring of curiosity today. I invite you to be curious with me because I'm going to do this probably from the lens of as if you had went to the museum with me. And I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to share, and just kind of get us into the the bolts of today's topic. Let's see, I'm gonna shrink that so I can see. All right. Scramble for Africa, Yinka Shonibare and transatlantic materiality. And when we talk about today, I want to just preference some things. As a person who really enjoys not only being in a humanist community, I identify particularly as a free former. That is to also be very clear that I engage the body, and I'm very interested in embodied humanism. The humanist experience to me is probably as much as I think many ways we are great with our thinking, I like to push on us regarding the body. And so today you will experience a little bit of what I call the kind of homiletic body, the body that speaks. And I will be looking at Yinka Shonibare's work because he uses a lot of figures. And looking at that work, I'll also give you the opportunity to kind of explore and share what you're seeing, what's coming up for you. And I'll have some specific questions that I want to kind of get to before we really get into the bulk of the exhibition. But let's really talk about who is Yinka Shonibare. I mean, if you've never heard the name before, it is probably fresh to your ears. And he's an amazing contemporary artist, a British-Nigerian artist born in 1962, multimedia, uses sculpture, photography, film, installations, you name it, this brother can do it. The most amazing thing about it also is that the work involves a lot around cultural identity and colonialism and post-colonialism. And what does it mean in the contemporary context when we talk about today and when we talk about colonialism? And when we think about ourselves within the American context, which I would love for us to do, is to sit with how we have in many ways influenced and in some way still today are in collusion with much of colonial practices. That might be a little tough for us to dig into, but I promise you, if you let me do a talk on another day, we can talk about colonial practice in America. One of the things though, too, is that the work is deeply related, but is deeply related and shows the relationship between Africa and Europe. And so, yeah, so you're going to see a lot of Western motifs today. And what we're really interested in looking at is kind of national identity. Identity is very key for Yinka. Yinka spends a lot of time really contesting this idea of hybridity and how hybridity works on identity. That we begin to question what is the idea of possibly authenticity. Let's look a little further. Some main events that are in Yinka's life. At 17, if you ever have the opportunity to meet Shonibare, he has a spinal inflammation that has caused him to be paralyzed. So when you meet him, he's in a wheelchair. And so I really love talking about him for two reasons, because this is an artist with a disability. And so when we talk about accessibility for communities, especially some of our own current spaces, we want to think about, of course, access and accessibility. And so while he was receiving his MFA at Goldsmith in the United Kingdom in '91, he was stricken with this. And so it's quite unfortunate, but in many ways, his work, as you can see with the Revolutionary Kid, just offers us some insight on how he understands his body in relationship to the figures that he is also, in many ways, formulated and created. In addition, you see that with the Revolutionary Kid here, you see a fox head of taxidermy, and then you kind of see some very unique clothing that I'll go into later. In the mid 80s, though, I thought this was very important for us to know as we begin to ride through this kind of aesthetic journey, that in the 1980s, he was at the Shaw School and he was working with a tutor, and the tutor said, and during the 80s, it was kind of the close of the Cold War, as mentioned, and he wanted to do very specific work related to the Cold War and do some drawings and abstractions around that. And the artist who was tutoring him at the time said, "You're of African origin, aren't you? Well, why aren't you producing authentic African art?" I'm going to say that again. Why aren't you producing authentic African art? This begins to pull on questions of authenticity. It begins to really help us sit with what is going to probably come about regarding our next conversation around the Berlin Conference, and the Berlin Conference that had occurred in the late 1880s. So who was at the table for the Scramble of Africa, right? And so the conference took place in 1884, and we have 13 Eurocentric powers on board, as you can see listed. And I just kind of, offer you a bit of a visual so that you can see how everything was situated. And I want to point out how what this particular conference is expected to do is heighten colonial activity. This is 1884. We're having this discussion, right? This is when this is happening. In addition to that, we use the word heightened colonial activity. So it's very intentional, because if you remember, in 1808, it was when Congress decided here in the US to ban the imports of slaves, right? So let's just sit with that. 1808, there's a ban. And then between then until 1884, which is not big, not that big of a gap, there is a real industrialized idea to subdue Africa. There's a real clear advancement to do that. And if we look carefully too, we see these terms free. I want to just unpack that we have that there were during this time particularly two free countries. One being Liberia, which was not necessarily a free country, and the reason for that is because America itself was in that colony. But in addition to that colony, though established by what they say free slaves, which is a very, do we hear that? I hope we hear the oxymoron in that, free slaves, right? Was established by free slaves. It was still under US, ruling, right? So particularly around that time, there were a lot of missionary work. There was a lot of missionary work coming in from America, especially because in Liberia, there were many coffee plantations that were developed. So we definitely see a huge influx on that. So I don't want us to confuse these as free as being like, oh, these people were never enslaved. These people never were. There's still some turmoil there, and there's still some conflict when we identify these particular countries as free. Also Ethiopia. Ethiopia actually also had a treaty in the mix. So they actually defended that they could not be approached with colonial rule. And I think that's quite significant to look into. And if you want further information, I recommend that you look at this further and do yourself a favor, because there's a lot of things I can't touch on today just because of the time. And I want to offer us as much time to be in dialogue about the work and about the artistry. Yeah, Google it. That's my thing. So what are we breaking it in? What are we breaking Africa into? What are we seeing in Africa? What is this? What is so precious about this land? And I do this very intentionally. I ask the question all the time: democracy for who? Democracy for who? And who's a part? Because this was supposed to be a democratic process. This is a democratic process, and I think the way that we think about democracy and the Eurocentric framework of democracy is something that can be even contested today and can be looked at today. So as you can see, there's several things on the horizon regarding the international fair trade law at the time, right? The international fair trade. So when these countries, and let's just, if I can go back and see, as we can see, we see British all the way going from South Africa up to Botswana. We're looking at gold and diamonds and platinum and copper. Does everybody see that? As we go back, we look at the French West Africa, right? Let's look at all what France is doing here. France is they have cotton, iron, national gas, uranium, gold, oil. They have a bit of diamonds as well, right? Clothing and textiles. The country is filled with wealth. But if we think about a lot of the images that we see about Africa, we don't see that wealth. If we think about the images we see in media, that wealth is not something that is portrayed. We don't see that wealth of the land, nor do we see that wealth on or directed and portrayed upon the people. And it was really good to hear, as I was talking in my group, about, right, how the experience in Botswana, who were the people that that my colleague and I experienced, right? And as we were discussing. And so I find that to be very important. I want to just point out very, as we talk about textiles and clothing, one of the things that we'll be talking about is this method called batik. It's a wax fabric from Indonesia. And it was mass produced by the Dutch. And so this became, and actually in the 60s, late 1960s, let me get very point around that. 1960s, this Ankara fabric with the batik wax on the fabric becomes known as a West African identifier. It becomes a way of one to say that one is authentically African. So when Europeans would see it, they knew that these individuals were particularly African, or it was a particularly African inspired piece. But let's just be real, it wasn't. It's mass produced by the Dutch, and it is a wax fabric from Indonesia. Talk about hybridity. I hope we're pushing on our ideas around authenticity as well right now. Right? When we think about this idea of these two countries, right? I mean, well, not just these countries. I'm thinking about these two ideas of cultural compromise and commerce, right? And as I showed you looking at this slide, and then again, this slide, right? One of the things that we need to sit with is cultural compromise and how the continent is affected by cultural compromise. Who has say? During the conference, Africa is not invited to that table. So there is no one who is of African heritage at the table making decisions about who to share this wealth of land with, right? I want to bring us to a little small contemporary example of how even though we think of ourselves as very post-colonial and no longer doing such violent things, when we look at the fact that there are people being paid in Uganda to stop removing trees to offset the carbon emission, when most Ugandans have made money, a lot of money to as a form of living by cutting down trees. Here it is, European researchers have come in and said, hold on, don't cut trees, we're destroying the environment. And now these individuals have to begin to find new ways of employment because they've depended on a system through colonialism that has told them that they need to constantly keep going after the wealth of their land and the raping of their land in order to sustain themselves. And can you imagine the drastic shift to be told something different? Right? I think we've all had little mind-blowing moments like that, especially with COVID. Just show you a little pictures, little things here. Leisure lady, as we think about commerce and as we think about, you know, who's who, right? Let me just invite a few before we go into our next segment of the actual table itself. What do we see? Just what do we see in these images so far?
Wealth and elegance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. What else do we see?
Folks can just unmute themselves and shout it out.
Yes.
Violence.
Violence.
Most of the characters are headless.
Right. Yes, right? The headlessness is this is a motif that Yinka brings us into. Very unique. This also this idea of the Victorian period, right? This England Victorian period, as you can see the gowns and how they are constructed. What do you notice about the gowns specifically? What do they have?
Well, one is like a patchwork.
Mm-hmm.
African fabrics. Yeah.
Yes.
They're African textiles.
Yes.
They're beautiful. Right. Beautiful, actually.
Very beautiful. Trust me, no, it's perfect. This is the work, right? And like we said, right now, and once again, we're pushing. We're going to tease on that notion that my dear sister just said just a few minutes ago about, right, African textiles. Is it really authentically African? Right?
Good question. Good question.
Right? Is it really when it is a mass produced product from the Dutch? And it was only deemed that way in the 1960s, right? Now we're like, is it really African textiles or is it just a textile that comes from a form of trade that just so happened to be something that was highly sought after by Africans? Do we see that? Do we hear that conversation right now? This is the hybridity. That's why I want to bring us into this discussion. It's very unique. What else do we see? Let's unpack a little further.
Those the leashed wild animals. It's like a domestication, a taming of or controlling of something natural.
Right. This idea of the control. And here it is. She's leisure, right? But what about these animals that are, you know, and for someone who loves animals, I myself, I have 2 Basenjis. If anybody knows anything about a Basenji, it's a barkless breed that comes from the Congo. And right, and so I have 2 full-bred Basenjis, and I love them dearly. But then when I see this picture, I immediately go, oh, you know, I'm like, that's not what I'm trying to do. But to say that I have a Basenji, I can tell you when I was living in Brooklyn, when I first got them, people would often ask me, they would say, are those Basenjis? I said, and then of course, because I was in the middle of, you know, Clinton Hill, everybody had a dog, some kind of breed, you know, it represented some kind of class. I'm not gonna pretend that all my life, you know, like, let's just be real. I felt very sophisticated to have a full breed dog that was of African descent, and it was particularly very unique, and not everybody could get it. Right? So here is something that comes up. Look at the things that I learned over, and now I'm like, oh, I want to heal. You know, what else comes up for us when we see these images?
I think color and pattern. I mean, the material can be colonial, the design and the folds can be, you know, colonial, but it actually picks up on the leopard pattern of the animals. I mean, those 2 things go together more than if it was a woman's dress in white, you know, pattern, no pattern.
Well, I mean, right, and here is Bart worried about stripes and black. Right? Bart, I've given you every pattern right here for you.
You got it.
But this is the beauty of also, right, the array, right? We have such a very monolithic view of how we like to see things put together. But here, with this aesthetic, he decolonizes our eye. I'm saying that very intentionally. He decolonizes our eye to see a Western motif adorned in textiles that were identified as African.
Okay.
Right? So here's the decolonizing, because what we have done for years is we're like, well, this pattern goes with this pattern. But if you look here, we don't see things that necessarily match.
Nope.
We don't see things that hold. And so this lets us know something about how we handle, in many ways, our own inclusivity. Right? How we hold our own inclusivity, how we want to experience diversity. Some people like to control their diversity. Some people prefer Chipotle's instead of going to the mom and pop restaurant that has been there for 20 years. Trust me, I live in New York City. I'm seeing it all the time. I'm like, Chipotle's not amazing food. Like, go to, you know, down the street, you know, and go, you know, go to that business that's really making real authentic, you know, Spanish food. And they're like, oh, right? It's so interesting when we think that we're post-colonial. Post-colonial is many ways is so wrapped up in a very monolithic view of diversity. So let's move on.
Just one question.
Yeah.
I just was curious about the intentionality of the 2 women that had guns pointed at each other.
Yes.
They look so confident and poised, actually, and yet.
Well, right. So we're very familiar with dual fights and things, and there is also a male figure figure version of this that he did, and one of the things is that when we talk about commerce, we're also talking about war. Right. And I think one of the things that Yinka tries to bring us into very delicately is the idea of violence that comes, right, with class and how it is done. the posture is very dignified. There is a very sophisticated point of view in which one, right, is pointing the gun, their stance, right, and the aiming for the head, right? The aiming for the head is key. And in many ways, we could consider the aiming of the head as somewhat a disembodied experience, right? That we are that's how removed we are, that they're really not going to shoot anything. We're so removed. Our bodies are just operating based off of a system because we are subliminally taking in so much stuff about class, commerce, race, culture, like all of it. And technically we can be so far removed that our bodies are in many ways just adorned in all of it, right? That's why, I mean, I often talk about this word coloniality, right? It's a mentality of colonialism. Like, we actually can't not imagine. Sometimes we have a hard time imagining a world without a cell phone now, right? We have a hard time imagining ourselves without banks. I mean, imagine a system that you hold dear and you remove it. Most of those systems were created due to the framework of European colonialism. To remove any kind of system and remove your experience out of that system, you in many ways are walking blindlessly or headlessly into, right, this kind of violence. So we can, and I think we can also ponder this even further, even when we begin to look at the table. So here's the Scramble for Africa, and I like I said, I kind of gave you a briefing of the Berlin conference. It's in here I'm offering a contemporary analysis using Yinka Shonibare. So it's like, well, you kind of had a little bit of an art history and not necessarily a history on everything. So that's why I tell you to please do as much research as possible. But Yinka offers us a very unique position here. I want to take us through some of the details that is happening on this table. As you can see, there's a very large table. Africa is placed on the table. And then once again, we see here these Victorian gentlemen sitting and in discussion about Africa and all the divisions that it's going to be broken up, which is what we ideally would kind of develop from just looking at this. Let's look at some of the smaller details so that you can get a glimpse of the work further. Here we get a little bit closer of the map. We also see some of the conversation. What do you think in just some of the posture, just looking at the posture? Even if I don't know if you can do this while you're at Zoom. No, you don't have to do it while you're on Zoom. But if you want to just kind of get your body a bit in those positions that some of these figures are in. When is the last time you've probably been in that position? What was that discussion like? What caused you to get in that position?
Jay, I'm being overwhelmed by the image of Africa, which to me, my first impression was that it was a stain on the table.
Exactly.
A finished, expropriated hardwood with a stain that is Africa on it. It's not a map. I mean, and it's a map that's engendered in the product.
It's a product design. Do we look at the material? Once again, that's transatlantic materiality, right? Now it's not just the land, it becomes the people.
Excuse me.
Go ahead.
I see very entitled people from their body language who are clothed in the results of colonialism and exploitation.
That's, yeah, this is exactly. Anybody else? Well, let me just pick up some too with this idea of materiality. And when we think about transatlantic materiality, this, you know, and when we think of the continent of Africa, we have to think that, you know, slavery even still exists today, right? Within the context of our global world, there are various forms of it. And one of the things that we have to think about is that, you know, in 1808, though Congress signed for us, there were other countries that were still, you know, kind of looking at slavery as a way, and America depended deeply. And it's funny because, you know, records show that America did not attend this conference. The US did not attend this conference. Let me be more specific about that. I'm not just talking about America. I'm talking about the US did not attend this conference, though they had a local state establishment within Liberia. They did not pursue it. My question for you, as if we can hypothesize for a minute, in 1808, slavery was banned. Why do you think in 1884 that they did not decide to attend that conference nor heighten colonial ruling? What do you think that position was for? I have my own thoughts, but I'm just curious.
One thought is that with the emancipation, you have a so-called liberated workforce that you don't need to dilute by, you know, bringing people from offshore. You have a pacified, so-called pacified workforce. So it's pre-globalistic. We've got enough people here. We are going away from plantation agriculture into industrial development, and we have the workforce. We no longer need Africa, which would change, you know, with the raw materials. But the U.S. is cut out of the big pie. They're not about ready to fight for it. They're concentrated on the labor aspect rather than the raw material aspects.
Okay, I like that. I like that. That's something I push on as well. Anybody else want to add some wisdom to that?
Now, this just to refresh my memory, this conference was in 1808.
No, the conference was in 1884. We banned slavery in the United States in 1808.
The importation of slaves from Africa.
Yes.
And in 1808.
Yes.
And then they depended on the slaves existing to have lots of babies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. There is that. There is that.
But we did continue importing slaves even after the ban.
Exactly. And there is that.
Yeah. Jim has his hand up.
Yeah, on a practical level, we didn't have a Navy capable of extending power in Africa at that time in the 1880s. We didn't really get world-class Navy up until almost 1900.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really just pragmatic. We just didn't have the guns to sit at the table.
Well, right, and this is, and if we think about it, we're not far. We're not far from the emancipation. We're also looking at American Reconstruction. We go further, right? And America is still in somewhat of a turmoil. It still hasn't healed in many ways, but here it is. You know, we have already established within this country a system that is already heightened as a result of offering Black people, or in this case, those who were enslaved, an emancipation by not adequately and equitably ushering them into a system that was not made for them. Does everybody hear that as well? Right there. So there's a lot of things happening, and it's not probably just one issue. And as we offer these several perspectives, I think that what we see here too is we see that I would like to also argue a little bit further that that's why we have to look at the body as material here. Shonibare is bringing us into the body as material, particularly as we look at this table. We can think about the land, the body, the culture, the religion, all of it becomes material, a way of commerce, a way of making money, a way of exploitation, a way of exoticisms and fetishes, right? This is what we have to consider as we look at this work. Let's go a little further, just to look at some further details. Here are some more details of the table, a little bit more of the map. We see the engagement. One of my favorite postures. This is one of the images as from a profile side. And I just want to bring, I love this, right? It's like, I mean, I'm gonna let y'all just speak to this a bit for a moment as we look at these headless people go at it head to head.
Yeah, like the finger pointing and the holding out. And one of the slides before has somebody with a hand under the table, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the restraint, this, the figure, in the center is being restrained by one of the participants at the table. And it occurs to me also that the US had manifest destiny, which was an exploitation of its own continent.
Exactly.
And from which freed slaves were largely excluded. In terms of land being open, they were overtly discriminated against. They did not have the opportunity that even the poorest white folk had.
Mm-hmm. 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 I mean, let's just be real. Even though the conversation was about a 40 acres and a mule, 40 acres and a mule never happened.
No.
That's
a lot
right.
of people. I mean, let's just be real. I went to school in the 90s, and my teachers were still teaching, oh, people receive 40 acres and a mule. That was not true. And that was like, I was like, wow. Here it is. Later on, I learned past high school that no one ever received that, right?
And the way that was done was to remove the military compulsion to do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That it would not have been possible without military compulsion. A social use of violence, and they removed that, and we get the Jim Crow and all the post-Reconstruction stuff.
Can I offer us to look at something? I got a little closer as we're unpacking, and as we talk about finger pointing. If you saw these without the light is a little tint in this one. I've seen them actually a little bit. I've seen these images, this figure in the statue, particularly a little bit closer, and it's a little bit more orange. But do you notice the complexion?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about Yinka's choice of complexion? Think about the fact that he talks about authenticity, and think about the fact that he talks about hybridity, identity and cultural hybridity.
Actually, the skin tone is picking up from the fabric colors. which is it's almost like it's part of the style. You have what might be seen as authentic African patterns and colors, but it's like the skin tone matches that that style as opposed to what one might expect to see skin tone of someone wearing that with that garment.
I was wondering if it's a reflection of the hybrid idea. They're kind of halfway between really dark and really light.
I mean, when we think about these kind of 13 powers, these 13 Eurocentric powers, right? And I think about my dear sister who was speaking about the idea of Africa regarding humanity and civilization, kind of like a relating back to civilization. Like, there's such a tension there of understanding ourselves in relationship to the other, right? And so that you're touching on right there again, right? This idea of complexion being right in between, not too dark and not too light, but it holds a very unique tension, right? What I think it's, Yinka doesn't talk about the complexion. I'll be honest with you. Yinka doesn't talk about it often. And, he considers this to be a neutral color. He says that this is a neutral color.
Okay.
So, so when the artist expresses that, we take it at face value and just like, this is just a neutral color. It has nothing to do with race or anything, or, but when we begin to think about the topic and the power of the topic and the things that it brings up regarding colonialism, race, and class, I mean, we know who we're talking about. We have an idea of the complexity that followed, right? It's a complex. It's a let's just be real. It's a complex oppression, right? And I often like to look at it this way. It's a complex oppression of complexion. So complexion is attached to the oppressive device. The hybridity that he's bringing in also allows for us to sit with the tension of things being lighter, being possibly more glorified, right? These are colors that if you did go to Egypt and you were to have seen, this would have been particularly the male color, the stronger male complexion of one of the sculptures. That orange like amber, right?
Right.
Phyllis has her hand up.
Excuse me. I also think that, without cooperation of African leaders, so much of colonization and the exporting of slaves wouldn't have happened. So I don't think any race is pure on the face of it.
Ma'am, you better teach today. You better teach today. You better come on. You better come on. I'm here for that. See, this is, this is some good stuff. This is good stuff. Here is just the conclusion that I wanted to offer. Like I said, and this is kind of a better lighting. This is where you really get a chance to see it. I just wanted to give you something like that. To conclude, I don't know who that is up there. But just looking at the discourse, one of the things that I want to leave us with as we conclude, and Bart, I'm sorry for going over time, and I hope that we've all had a really great time and exploring together and looking at our own human possibility. But as I conclude, I invite us to look at how many ways we actually understand our own modes of colonialism, even though we like to say post, and think about what systems we are engaging. Because colonialism is deeply, even in this country, is still here, and still, and it just comes in different forms, and we give it new names. Like I used to tell my students when I was teaching middle school, you know, like, well, somebody bullied me, and I said, you know what, bullying will never stop. When you get older, it's gonna be, you know, somebody's gonna say something you don't like, and you call it, and then they'll be racist. Say somebody will say something else you don't like, and then you'll say that they're, you know, they're misogynist. We just get real fancy with terms. We identify what it is. And I want us as a community to sit with a lot of the complexity with this work. Who are we? I invite you to think, as you're looking at this image, which one of us, even though we probably would never want to be here, which one of us could be at this table? Because a lot of us could be at this table because we seek to engage a system of power that leaves somewhere or someone without any kind of support. And when we look at that table, we look at those, and we look at those figures, which one could we be, right? And think about that. I'm not asking, that's a rhetorical question, but I want us to sit with how we engage with power today. I want us to sit with how we engage with power and consider the culture, some of the cultural nuances, and consider also the complexities, and realize that violence follows it as well as peace can follow it. As I conclude my talk, I just invite you to do your best to decolonize your mind, even if you still don't know what that means yet. I recommend a few good books, and I will be glad to put them in the chat as you think about things like, you know, post-colonial or decolonial information. So I will open it back up and end this screen share so I can see all your faces. Hi, everyone.
Wow.
I'd love to wear any of those coats, though.
Right? I'm telling you, I'm like, I need one of them.
Indeed, indeed. Well, I'd like to invite Brooklyn to bring us into a little bit more music. Where are you, Brooklyn? Hey, there you are.
Right
Okay.
here.
Spotlight.
All righty. There we go. Okay.
Beautiful. All right, so we are at a point now where we're kind of getting late-ish. I did want to ask, Jay, are you available to hang out after we finish the meeting if people want to carry on the conversation?
Yeah, I can hang out for a bit. That's not a problem at all.
I know you have travels today, so I'm conscious of your time.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm gonna try to get out of here no later than 2. So I mean, I can do probably about another 15, 20 minutes.
Excellent. All right, so we'll carry on for the rest of our pieces then, and those who are interested and able, we'll stay on. And thank you for that. And we may very well want to just have you come back again too. But
yeah, I'm glad to.
One does not prevent the other. So it is the time for milestones. And is there anyone here who has a milestone? You can just raise your hand either electronically or by waving frantically. Well, seeing none, I can say that I have a milestone. So yesterday, Ruthann and I received a photograph via text from our son, Gary, and it was him with his new fiance. Yes, they got engaged yesterday, so we're all very happy. Her name is Olivia, and they are just very happy together. And the engagement happened just in time for him to get on a plane today. He's been transferred to Florida for a month and a half, maybe 2 months, maybe a little bit longer, to finish a job on a bridge near Tampa in St. Pete's. Anyway, so they're newly engaged and newly separated, but very happy nonetheless, and us too. So anyway, just wanted to share that. Gary being a product of the ethical education system here at the Ethical Society, I'm very proud.
I meant to add that I will be passing my 80th birthday in a week.
Whoa, go to Judy. Who knew?
I'm here.
Happy birthday.
Welcome. All right, any other milestones? If not, we'll move on to announcements. Okay, first of all, we do welcome people to make donations to the Ethical Society, and I just put a link up in the chat if you would like to do that today. There are also, let me see, I can share my screen for a couple announcements here. Where to go? Okay. In addition, we have, boom. Just a reminder that in a couple of weeks, we have the spring membership meeting. So please mark your calendars for that. It's going to be on Sunday this year. So that'll be extremely convenient. I'm sure, I'm not too sure I have the time right, but come to the platform meeting as usual. There'll be a presentation and then we'll have a nice meeting. And of course, the food will be great, whatever you're bringing to your own house. Anyway, also, the Climate Solutions 101 course, we now have 11 people who have signed up for it, but it's still not too late to do that. Let me put the registration in the chat as well. If you'd like to register, this is a free course. It is offered through, it's actually offered through a drawdown. They have provided all the materials, but we'll be running it from our own Zoom account. And so this will be a Zoom meeting. If you do the form, the registration does ask you when you're most available. And so this is a good chance to do that. And let's see. Just a note that game nights, we hope to continue them. One of the things we're considering now, so this is the second Friday of every month. Last Friday, we had a good time playing 20 questions, a very low-tech version of an online game. Next time round, now that we're getting closer to opening, we might even consider doing a hybrid game night where some people could come and do their games in the meeting room and other people could join via Zoom. So it's something to consider. So we do ask that you do some consideration of that and see if that's something that you'd be interested in working on. All right. Are there any other announcements? Ruth Ann, unmute, please.
Next book group is Monday, June 14th at 3 o'clock on Zoom so far. And the book is Vladimir Putin, the Man with the Vanishing Face.
Thank you for that. I do want to mention that a number of people have spoken about organizing a walk now that we have fewer restrictions in terms of our being together in general. And I'm wondering if there's anyone who'd like to work on a walk for next weekend, which happens to be Memorial Day weekend. But I do wonder if that might be a time when people would think about doing a walk. So if this is something that interests you, please send me an email, leader@wsfec.org. And I'd be very happy to work on this. I know I could use a good walk myself. A few of the people who have made this request are people who have rollators. And so, you know, flattish walks are probably the most desired by those individuals for sure. Okay, and I do want to thank Jay again for a wonderful presentation today. Also, thank Matthew for providing the technical assistance to keep us running, and of course, to Brooklyn for the lovely music. And again, if you can stay after closing words, we'll have a nice chat with Jay for the next few minutes. We're down probably 5 or 10, but still, you know, let's see what we can do with that. And so quickly to closing words then. Closing words today are by Yinka Shonibare. Art making is a form of alchemy, in a way because you are trying to make gold from nothing. When it works very well is when you manage to turn the ordinary into the extraordinary. And wishing some extraordinary times for you ahead. Thank you for joining us and welcome to this day. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. And again, feel free to hang out, unmute yourselves and whatever else, and we can have a little bit more chat time.
Earl.
Are you there? Lucia?
Yes.
Hi, I'm so sorry. Did you email me or leave a message or what?
Yes.
You emailed me?
Yeah, can I call you at some point about that recipe?
You can call me right now, or I could tell you right now. My computer died. It was in Best Buy, and I got your message, and then the computer died, and I couldn't locate your message. It was in my cell or my computer, whatever.
Right.
But last night I called Bart.
Well, you know what? Yeah. I think I'll call you when just the two of us, so we can share the recipe.
Let me give you my number, okay? I'll give you my number now.
Yeah, can you pop it in the chat, Joanne?
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Thanks.
Sorry.
You can just send it right to Lucia.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne.
Thanks.
Sure.
Jay, the comment that was made about no culture being without fault reminds me of the book Homecoming we read in our book club, which follows a family in Ghana and shows the violence that was originated from the indigenous culture that fed the Portuguese slave trade and then transported people over to the United States, so that your figure of the dueling women blowing off two heads, all of a sudden came into sharper focus. Dueling is a Western motif that justifies violence, which is otherwise anathema. Right. So that Western culture used the indigenous violence to feed its own economic needs. And so it blew the heads off of both cultures. And I think that was, and if anybody hasn't read it, Homecoming is amazing.
Isn't it Homegoing?
Homegoing.
Yes.
Yeah, Homegoing. It's an amazing, because it brings in one line of the family that goes to the United States in slavery and stays with a line of the family that remains in Ghana. And that juxtapositioning is really really dramatic. I would recommend it.
Jay, there was a question about the where someone might find that installation from the work that we saw today.
That installation, I think it's a permanent exhibit. Let me make sure I'm correct here in saying this. Because I mean, when it travels, it travels. Him like a few what's my other one? Kehinde Wiley. They don't stay still with their work. They really don't. I think it's one of the most interesting things. The work right now, I'm Googling. This is what I do. So I'm making sure that we have a permanent exhibition somewhere. You know what? I don't see anything as of right now. I do know that it is probably, I know it's a part of a particular collection. So if wherever that collection is 9 out of 10 where it's going to be. Last time it was in Dallas.
Wow,
So
okay.
yeah, so I don't know if I would have to really look it up, and I do apologize that I don't have that information.
Oh, quite all right.
You know, but yeah, I think that's, you know, I look at what Yinka is doing. One of the hardest, one of my favorite philosophers, which I do recommend, it's a short read, but I do recommend it, is Jose Vasconcelos. He was a Mexican philosopher. And I recommend his book, Cosmic Race. And it is a very small book, Jose Vasconcelos, and it is a very small book. It's called Cosmic Race. And if y'all ever decide to take that on as a group reading, I'm very fascinated to see, because this book is not based on race. It's really a book based on aesthetics. And I would love to see how we as kind of as Americanized as we can be, how we can work through that discussion. Oftentimes, you know, even in just talking about frameworks around race and racism in this country, I often sit with, I do think about artists that I have engaged with who talk about cultural identity and things like that. And I really think that not only we're dealing with systems, but when we look at one system of Western aesthetic, I always say we're experiencing a aesthetic cultural dissonance. And so people are like, what is that? I'm like, it's really just a long way of saying racism. But you know, and then people are like, oh, I'm like, but it depends on what with aesthetics is so interdisciplinary, because you never know what Yinka presents to us is far more significant when we begin to look at what affects our performance, our being, and things like that. I see you, Errol. Yes.
Yeah, the burning question in my mind is, why does Yinka have so many of his subjects headless? Is it because in my thinking, the human head is where you see the facial expressions and, you know, what's going on with a human being. I know he has the body language part of it, you know, where you can see fingers pointing and grabbing each other's arm and stuff, but why remove such a big part of the human personality, if you will, from his subjects?
Well, one of the big things that Yinka does talk about and we kind of catch it. He doesn't necessarily talk about it as a part of the headlessness, but I do notice is that he does spend a lot of time unpacking the idea of the subconscious, how things subconsciously just work on us. And the subconscious is a very unique place to rest. And we see this work also with like W.E.B. Du Bois. I mean, I was very fascinated to look at this work in relationship to the fact that, I mean, when I created the film Humanitas, like the conference that Adler created, with Du Bois, you know, around the 1900s in 1910, 1911. I mean, this work is, you know, that conference is not far from that discussion, right? Of the, you know, this Pan-African conference that Adler was a part of. So when we think about like subconsciously how it works, Du Bois talks about a two-ness, right? Being an American and both being Black. And I think the more that we keep unpacking these identities and these intersections in our own life, that break beyond systems, that allow for us to speak to our other aspects of our inherent worth, if you will, I think that we end up dealing with other forms of consciousness that, to a point, I don't think our head can hold all of it, you know, maybe, because we are doing the best that we can, but there's so much, it's like, after a while, you just like, the other question for me is like, I've always asked the question when I look at Yinka's work, is it a decapitation or is it an openness? Right? Is it a decapitation or is it an openness? And that is how I find that many of us go into conversation that way. We immediately will cut someone off, or in many ways, right, just be done with them, right? So we've already decapitated them, or we remain open where we can hold, you know, various things that we have not yet explored in our own self. So I think those are some things that we can kind of play with as we think about the kind of headless figures that he's offered.
Jay.
Yes.
You know, I see it as, without the head, as like thinking, thought, you know, but something interesting that you said, that two things, you mentioned orange amber being the color. It's amazing. I have a niece who is orange amber. And I had no way of identifying her color until you said it. In the summer, this child would be orange.
Wow.
And with the brown. And you said it, you went orange amber. I was like, oh, that's my niece. Finally, I could tie it down.
So
but
now you know she's neutral.
Yes, definitely. But the thing that you said at the end was engage in a system of power that leaves people without.
Yes.
Because at that table, Africa was not represented.
Exactly.
And therefore, I was also shocked. And I took a picture. I'll be honest with you. I took a picture of how the country was broken down by who owned what. And then when you showed that other picture, I was shocked. I never knew Africa had so much resource. And that it was all basically taken away. And so we have all these people in abject poverty because of this.
Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead, my sister. Please.
What I was just saying was that I couldn't believe that. And why was nothing ever done about that?
Yeah.
Well, things are done about it, just not things that you'd like to see done.
Right.
True.
You know, I want, because you know, I don't know, and I'll offer it as a space for James to hop in here, because James actually had been to Botswana, and Botswana actually has very similar economics to what we understand within the United States. When I say that, I'm talking about like wages wise. Teachers are decently paid, and we can kind of, and it's because of their wealth, because of the diamond industry, which is a very unique thing. It's one of the things that my colleague, Keith, who you met, Bart, talks about. And it's the reason why Botswana has done so well as a country, and has done its best to little by little push out colonial and post-colonial rules. And this has become something new that particular countries in Africa are doing now. They're trying to push out this post-colonial rule because they realize that they're still engaging in these powers. I mean, when we look at certain places in you know, within Africa, there are some places that, you know, I mean, people are still wearing wigs in Uganda, I think, if I believe correctly, for court. You know, it's just a part of, you know, that, you know, who they were colonized by, who influenced, and what systems were able to work on them as a product. I think that is one important factor that that we have, is that we have to understand the materiality and the product of the land, along with the culture, along with the body. I mean, for years, and one of the hardest places, though I critique it with love, is it's one of my biggest critiques to museums that actually label African art. It's not African art. Those are rituals, those are deities, those are sacred formations. They are not art like we think of art, right? And so there's not a sense of reverence for it. And then, like, and I've always asked the question, is the museum the best place for that? Right? When we have frameworks of compensation. Maggie, I'll offer you, I don't know if you've ever read the story of Sarah Barthman, who was a Black woman from South Africa, whose body was on display for over 200 years after she died. Right? So when we talk about bodies and material, and that Sarah Barthman she's known as she's known as the Hottentot Venus, but she's another figure that honestly her remains, she was not buried until I think it was until the 90s. Nelson Mandela had her body and all of her remains finally buried in the 90s, when she was discovered in around the early I think 1800s as well, early 1800s though. And they had her in particular circus shows and everything, because they had never seen such she had such a voluptuous body. She had a particularly a Black woman's body, as we stereotypically would know. So it was very voluptuous. And but just looking her up would even open your eyes up to the idea of the confiscation of land, the confiscation of body, and who has the means to produce it and make it. This is the thing about the idea of the fetish. If you can make money off of something, right, that's the fetish, right? And so look at how we engage commerce. Look at capitalism working, right? Not only on land, but on the body. And so these are things that you're ponder all of that. And congratulations to your niece having a beautiful color.
Thank you. Well, a little blonde hair too.
Come on, that's all right. Nothing wrong with that.
No, Jay, I'm just concerned for your time here. Are you?
I'm good. We can do a few more. Yep.
Okay. All right.
We'll do one. We'll do 2-1.
Okay.
You know, when I went into Africa, the first thing I noticed is just the vastness, right? People somehow, the message here in the West is like, Africa is one thing. Well, that's ridiculous. I mean, it's 6 times the size of Europe. Yeah. And we have no expectation that, people in different countries in Europe should be alike. Mm-hmm. So when you go to Africa, the difference between a Maasai and a Hottentot, they're just completely different people. And so depending on what part of the country you go to, not only do they physically look different, but then they've got different cultures, different, obviously their natural language is much different from one to the other. And so they themselves don't really have the same, I don't want to say they have a concept of being African, but it's not the same that we think of.
Yeah. Yeah. I see a Elise Spalding.
Oh, that's me.
Yeah.
Alice, I'm sorry.
Hey. Lanny.
Lanny, you want to ask a question?
Just a very thought-provoking. My gosh, my head is going all over the place.
Welcome to art.
Well, not just art, but your comments as well. But I had 2 things two of the many things that kind of popped into my head, is that there's a kind of colonization now going on in Africa by China with all of their infrastructure projects.
Yeah.
And the second thing that popped into my head, I'm a textile person, and I saw a wonderful documentary made by a British company. You know, Africa, or throughout Africa, there has been not just kente cloth, but a lot of textile manufacturing with those wonderful African, the colors and the designs that, that Africans love to wear, and there's like the display of the artist. And this documentary was about the kind of destruction. A lot of those textile and fabric businesses are going under because of all those things that we dump into bins at the gas station and at the supermarket for clothing and shoes that are bundled up. This was particularly about the UK because there are huge tons and tons and tons and tons of used clothes and old t-shirts with funny logos on them that are bundled up, sent to Africa, sold in Africa. I mean, they're sold to these charities, these clothes, and then they're sold to these African entrepreneurs, these village people who buy these bales kind of sight unseen and then go and resell cheap all this used clothing. It's tons, and it's destroyed the textile industry in Africa.
Wow. Wow.
There are so many resources that have been horribly manipulated, and it really, I mean, it really is sad. I think it's one of the things that I'm always fascinated at how many artists like now, and when I think about artists, because I know I focus on them a lot, but even African artists who use found material just so they're not engaging with like ideas of trade or this kind of like industry. So they do a lot of that. You know, that's one of the biggest things, Secret Life of Your Clothes. Oh yeah. Have to check that out. But yeah, so that's that. Thank you for bringing that in. Thank you for bringing that in. I love that brilliance. Thank you.
All right. Well, Jay, I think we really have to let you go. Jay is traveling down to Baltimore later today, so I've been getting nervous for like, oh, the traffic going down.
I'm your clergy at large. You know how I am. I'm like, okay, Baltimore, let's go. I need a station. I need a station somewhere.
That's right. That's right. Oh, Jay, thank you so much for being with us today. It really was just a treat. A treat. Yeah.
Huge hugs. Y'all be well, and let me know if y'all ever want to chat again about it. I'm so glad to be here. Take care.
Bye.
Beautiful.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
All right, folks.
Bye,
I'm getting ready to turn this thing off unless there's any last comments.
Nope, that's it. Just have a wonderful week, everybody.
Yeah, you too, everybody.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.